Hello, welcome to a brand new episode of Common Sense, a podcast where we look at how and why we can protect our collective urban commons like lakes, wetlands, neighborhood parks, community gardens, and playgrounds. We seek to understand how and why people are working to protect and conserve our commons. In today's episode, we have Kavitha Krishnamoorthy, the founder and the managing trustee of Kili Kili, a network of parents of children with disabilities, who's been very active and working on making playgrounds, especially inside parks, an inclusive space. So, Kavitha, thank you for joining us here today, and we really look forward to listening to your story and your experiences and and what are your key takeaways for the community who are interested to work and make playgrounds and parks more inclusive in the future. So, first of all, let me thank you. And
Thank you, Arvind, for having me on the show. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. First of all, let me start by asking you a very naive question of what made you, get into this entire aspect of working for playgrounds. Why playgrounds? Why parks? And why playgrounds within parks? If I can ask you.
Yeah, so I think the history of how Kilikili began goes to my own experience as a parent. I have a son who has a developmental disability. He has a seizure disorder with traces of autism. Now, when he was 2 years old, he is now 22, but so this is about 20 years back almost. The neighborhood we lived in Bangalore, which is Rajaji Nagar, we used to take him to the park, which is what most young families do in Bangalore, because you have so many neighborhood parks, and in the evening going to the park is like a done thing when you have younger kids. So we took my son to the park, and it was a statement my husband made at the park where he said, how come we don't see children with disabilities in the park? I think that really was the starting point, because it is true. We don't see kids who have a disability in the park. And, one started thinking about that, and then I kind of Googled, and I didn't find any public play space in the country, which was inclusive or which was welcoming of children with disabilities. So that is where actually the whole idea was sown, and that's how it kind of began. To really look at if our public play spaces don't have children with disabilities using them, then there is something drastically wrong. Because every child has a right to play in a public play space. So there is this huge proportion of children who are actually being completely marginalized. And that was really the starting point for beginning our work with Kilikili.
Wow, that's a very personal and a very very close to heart process where you have initiated this. But it kind of raises two main points for me. Is the first thing that you mentioned is lack of inclusivity and accessibility, lack of accessibility to these places, right? So when we look at it as commons, so one thing I might ask you is also that have you seen, because when I go to a park today, we still see that these areas, not just parks, a lot of public spaces and common spaces as well are still inaccessible to a certain set of the population, so how do you see this whole process of lack of inclusivity and accessibility? Let me put both here. Has it changed over the last 20, 22 years that you've been working on this? Or has there been an awareness that's been created? Has there been a change? If you would like to share your experiences in that.
Yeah, there's not a very simple answer to this question, Arvind. I think there definitely has been change. I do see that there is more awareness, and I think it's been, a lot of people have also been working in this space in the last 20 years. So there has been some change that one does see in terms of, both accessibility and inclusivity in such spaces. But as with everything, there's always a lot more to be done.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I was to say that when we began in 2006 was when our first park at Coles Park was inaugurated. When we began, the Coles Park was the first accessible or inclusive public play space in India. In 20 years, I can say that there are at least, about 20 to 25, I would know, across the country, where public parks have accessible or inclusive play spaces. Now, whether this is good, bad, in 20 years, in the country, in 20 years, you get another 20 more. That's really, it's at one level, it's really nothing. But at another level, I think I feel it is something that is gathering a momentum. It is slow. I won't say that it is probably not at a pace that one would have liked, but it is happening. And I do find different stakeholders, different groups of stakeholders who are now getting more and more into this whole thing. So, for example, when we began, it is, we had to be knocking the doors of the municipal corporation saying, this is something we want to do, and we want to do it in a public park, and you've got to kind of help support us. To last about 5 years, I see a lot of municipal corporations actually approaching us.
Okay.
So, I think that's like a major shift. And I think a lot of this has happened also in the context of the smart cities, where, one of the things that they do look at is parks and public recreational spaces. And then they've kind of also, some of them are beginning to narrow down on and also look at inclusivity. So in some way, so that is, I feel, within the government system, there is some change that has happened. As I said, these changes are like minuscule, and there's a whole lot to be done. The other group I notice is, amongst people like designers, one is finding more and more younger designers who are getting into this whole space and beginning to look at how spaces they design can be made inclusive. So I think these are like two very, two kinds of change that I can see. The third group I feel, which is, it's obvious, but I feel it is more vocal now, is the ecosystem of, surrounding children with disabilities themselves, which could be parents or schools or centers or, rehabilitation professionals. All of them, I feel, in the last 20 years, even 20 years back, people would say that play is very important. But I think, bringing it center stage and making it very, very critical that play should be recognized and given the kind of importance that it deserves. I think even in these groups, I think there has been a shift over the last 20 years. So I would say there is some change. I think the time for the idea of inclusive play spaces has come. There are different groups across the country who are working on it. But whether it is the fundamental shift where every play space that is being developed is being made inclusive, I think we have not reached there yet. I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Wow. Okay. But first of all, let me say congratulations that, your work on Coles Park led to the creation of India's first inclusive public play space, right? So congratulations on that. And I think that's what set the ball rolling. And as you said, though minuscule, it's a generational change. So it has to happen. It happens slowly. It's a behavioral change, I guess. So, but there were 2 or 3 things that kind of hit me while you were speaking. Is one of the things was how the governments itself have changed their approach towards it now that they're coming and asking for all of this. So there's an awareness that you see on the government side. And of course, the community itself, the other stakeholders are also waking up, bringing in their own designs, which is wonderful. But if I can go back a step, or I can just ask you, how easy is it for you? Because a public space is still open to everybody, right? It's a park and it's open to everybody. How easy is it for you to, how easy was it, not is it, let me say was and is still, to work with communities? Do you think communities are engaging enough? How did you go about this entire process of, working, getting them on board to do what exactly you want to do? Thank
you first for your nice and good words. Arvind. In terms of communities, see, when we began our work in Bangalore with, for example, Coles Park and later the Krishna Park and the Gayatri Devi Park in Bangalore, our communities were largely the ecosystem of, surrounding children with disabilities. So we were not engaging so much initially with the local community or the local neighborhood around the park, at least till the park got developed, till the play space got developed. I must also clarify that though I use the word parks, loosely, our work has actually been in the play spaces within the park. So it's the play spaces which have been made inclusive, not the entire park necessarily, though some features would extend to the entire park also. So anyway, for the first, these 3 parks, I think we engaged most with the ecosystem surrounding children with disabilities. So for example, when we began Coles Park, for example, we actually had a consultation with children with disabilities and their families and their caregivers or their teachers who live around the park, schools which were close by, some people who we knew had children with disabilities in the local residential area. These were the kind of groups we actually consulted with, and we took a group of children to the park and we said, okay, you tell us what's difficult in this space and what you would like to be changed. So they actually sat with a lot of creative material. They did collages, they did paintings, and which gave us an indication of what they were looking for. And this was a similar process which we also repeated with the adults. So they could be parents, they could be other caregivers, teachers, etc. And it was very illuminating. Not just the Coles Park consultation, but all the consultations we've had with children post that also. For almost every park, that's the process we follow, where we try and meet with kids who are likely to use that park and then find out, what they would like. And it was very illuminating because while we expected that they would say things like, we want swings and we want slides and we want this play equipment, they actually had a very holistic understanding of the play space. So they would come up with things like, we want flowers, we want grass, we want trees, there should be birds, the watchman should not shoo us away from the lawn. People should not smoke in that area. So many things. That there should be a first aid kit. Their understanding of what a play space or a play environment should be was not restricted to just play equipment. It was actually the entire environment and their experience of that environment. And that was actually very, very illuminating for us because, you would tend to think that if you ask a kid what you want in a park, they'll say, we want a slide and we want a swing. But actually, their vision was so much more holistic, which was an eye-opener for us. And which was another, it was like a reminder to say that we really should be talking to children and getting their opinions a lot more. So, so this is where we began, and we put down all these, thoughts and aspirations from different groups, and we approached the commissioner. And that time, I'm sure your other guests have also told you that, working with the government is like, it could go either ways, and a lot depends upon the officer who is there. So for us, the commissioner then was Mr. Jairaj, who was already very sensitized because he was also the president of the Association for the Mentally Challenged. So he already had an inkling of the kind of, issues persons with disabilities face, and he was very sensitive. And he said, yes, of course we should do this. Let's do it. And it literally we went with a big presentation to convince him, etc. And it took 3 minutes to say, yeah, of course we should do it. So that was good. And so at the highest level, we had support right from the beginning. But I think it took time, working with the government is not always so easy. And I think with the middle and the lower functionaries who are actually involved with the park, it took a lot of time. But yes, it finally happened. So those were our the beginnings. That's where we began.
Wow, that's just interesting how you came up with taking the children there. And as you said, they are so much more holistic in what they want, right? And they're more honest, let's put it that way. They're not bogged down by constraint of resources. That brings me to this entire not constraint of resources, but they are more imaginative in what they want, I would say, and they're free to speak. But then that also brings me to this question. The next question, the most important thing is resources. So have you, as parks and play spaces within parks are more or less public spaces, right? So government owned spaces, government take custodian spaces. How easy is it? For example, yes, of course, you had Mr. Jairaj, as you said, officer who was already sensitized. But also, one of the things that we always hear when it comes to managing common spaces is the lack of resources, be it both human resources or financial resources. So, how easy was it? Do you also look for corporate social responsibility funding? What kind of how exactly do you go about managing all of this in terms of both human and financial resources?
Yeah, so I think the first park what we decided was we would do it as a partnership. So where the BBMP took on the role of, which is the municipal corporation, took on the role of doing all the civil works which were needed. And we as Kilikili said, we will, as our contribution, we will, kind of take on funding the play equipment. That's where we started. But we soon realized that actually the municipal budgets, they have a budget for play equipment also. So all our subsequent parks since then, which would be about another 9 or 10 across the country, all of them we have actually used only the municipal corporation budgets. We've not used any private or corporate funding for at least the development of the park. And that's also because we believe that if it is a public play space and it is something that is meant for citizens, then the government should actually be funding it. And they have the money. This thing what you're saying about where are the resources, I really think there are resources with the government. We've should be able to tap it. What happens is, like in our case, the thing was they had money for play equipment. It is just that we had to tell them what are the kind of equipment they should be ordering or they should be kind of getting, such that they will meet the needs of children with disabilities. So we've not done any rocket science research into what kids with disabilities need. It is a lot of it is just common sense, where we've just kind of said that, this is the kind, these are the small modifications you need to make. And all of the suppliers in all our parks have been the regular play equipment, manufacturers who anyway supply to the corporation for all their parks. So the reason for doing this also to not make this so rarefied and so specialized that it will always be just, one or two parks which will have it. It is something that you can actually put in each and every public play space. It doesn't require more money. It only requires imagination. You just have to start thinking from the lens of persons with disabilities, and then you will be able to see what a play space or any public play space for that matter requires. So that's what we've been doing since then. So everything has been coming through the development costs have been coming through the community. Through the government. One of the challenges we have faced is what happens after the place is developed, and that's really where the actual work begins. Yeah. Because maintenance has been a huge issue and a huge challenge also. So when you talk of a public play space, it is what you just said, it's open to everybody. So there is going to be wear and tear. There is going to be, a very high usage, and you have to have a system for addressing, wear and tear, addressing maintenance issue, which sadly we've really not been able to crack. We as in Kilikili, as well as the government or the local community. I don't think that's something that in any formation we've been able to really crack. Except I'd like to talk about one instance in Chennai, where which is really out of the 10, that's really the only park, or maybe another couple of others, where the community ownership was so high that the maintenance was also addressed. So what we did in this park, this is the park we developed in Chennai, which was the first park in Chennai in Santhom. And this park, we managed to get a very active volunteer community which resided around the neighborhood. Now we try and do this in every park, but somehow in this park it clicked. Okay. Now that group was so proactive and so good that they had volunteers on a roster basis every evening and every morning when the usage would be very high, and they had these volunteer badges, and they would actually go there, and they would, in a sense, kind of see that vandalism doesn't happen. Not that children don't play, but vandalism doesn't happen, or like very older children, who probably could damage an equipment, they don't use it. They started doing that kind of thing, and that really, really helped. So basically, when the local community or the community takes, ownership and creates systems by which there is, plays this watchdog kind of a role, then we find that that's the only way actually we've been able to address ongoing kind of, damages to equipment kind of thing. But also what happened in this particular park was the maintenance contract was not with the government. Actually, the corporation, awarded the contract to a local builder. So it was part of their CSR. So what you were talking about CSR, this was part of their CSR. So typically, whenever we complain to them about maintenance, etc., the resolution was slightly faster than if it was with the government.
Yeah.
So I must also say that it was slightly faster, but not that it was always, it's always good. I mean, we still had to follow up with them a lot. And there have been times when our volunteers have just gone and replaced a bulb or replaced, a ball bearing or something like that, because even they were not responding fast enough. So I think that happens, So in terms of what you're saying, where do the resources come from? For development, the financial resources completely from the government. For maintenance, it's been mixed. Sometimes it's been government, sometimes it's been private. And in terms of oversight, I mean, I do believe that it's only if a community, the local community, is the only one which can actually have oversight, because the government is too big. I mean, look at Bangalore, no? I mean, Bangalore had, last I knew, some 1,200 odd parks. And there are some 3 officers who are there. I mean, even if a very diligent officer was to visit each park in his zone, he'll probably visit once in a year, each park. I mean, it's not going to be feasible. So, there has to be a mechanism where the community has oversight. They also have rights. I mean, they also have some rights to be able to petition the local government, be able to, their voice being heard, there being a redressal mechanism, there being a faster response system. I think all of this is required if we need to see that things are maintained much better than they are. So I think that's been a major thing. So when you talk about human resources, I think we need to kind of also support the government. Local communities, in a voluntary capacity, would probably have to play that role of supporting the local government to do it. But the development and the primary maintenance role, I would still hold with the government.
True. Exactly. Thank you, because that's exactly what a public space is all about, right? So the public space is still something that the government has a say in. It's still a public-owned space. So I totally agree with this. That is why I was saying, as you gave the example of Bangalore, with regard to human constraints that the governments also face, is very challenging, and it's the same across every type of common. I think one of the best examples is the case of lakes as well, right? So as you've been in Bangalore, I'm pretty sure that you're very aware that how difficult it is for the government itself to take care of lakes, and how communities have also stepped up. So I think, the same thing applies to parks and play spaces within these parks as well. I'm pretty sure. And as you said, it's just these examples where communities really strongly motivated to maintain it is where it kind of becomes successful case. But that also brings me to a point where, because we're talking of communities, right? So parks and play spaces as such are very social spaces. There have been examples that these kind of play spaces is what has brought in, some of the best cricketers in this country to the best football players of this country, where they've played in these spaces which are accessible and open to everybody. So it becomes a kind of a social space. So have you, over the past 20 years, seen a change of how these spaces have evolved do you think it's become more social, or has it been a regression of, a provision of the social space for the residents and the communities around it?
If I was to speak of Bangalore, I would think that, there are two trends that I see happening, Arvind. One is that there are, in some ways more spaces being developed with more, for example, more active, say, resident welfare associations, for example. You do see more and more green spaces or parks coming up. But if I was to see that from the child rights kind of a lens, or from the children's, lens, I see a disturbing trend, because what is happening is, I feel open spaces which were just left, where children just played, without having too much intervention. It was a space which was truly a common, in the sense that it was just there and children just played. In whatever way they saw fit. They didn't need, actually, children often don't also need too much of play equipment and play things and stuff. But these spaces are being converted into, parks at the behest of adults, who have the voice through their residents' welfare associations, and children are actually losing out on the play space itself. So when a piece of land which is just left open is being used by children to play, gets converted into a park, typically there may be a play space within that, but it gets very restricted. There may be 10% of that entire space which is then designated as a play space, and the rest basically becomes a place for adults to use, which is for, they'll put a track around the space. They can walk, they can jog, those kind of things. So I do see a disturbing trend of children's play spaces being eroded. Natural spaces for children to play in neighborhoods are being eroded and being replaced by parks which are, I would say, not that children don't use it, but also primarily meant for adult use.
True. Yeah, exactly. So that also then raises a lot of questions, as you said, from a child rights perspective, on the accessibility of these spaces for the children, right? Because most of the day the parks are locked. It's open only during certain periods of time where they can access it. So it raises a lot of these questions for sure. So what, according to you, could be this is like my penultimate question for you. What, according to you, could be done to make these spaces more accessible to children in general and to children with special abilities in particular?
To children in general, I think we've got to see open spaces as we have to see children also being an equal stakeholder, which we often forget. Look at playgrounds also, no? I see even in Bangalore and other cities, playgrounds are just being run over, because often they are in prime areas where land value may be higher, and so somehow there's a process, through the process of urbanization and urban growth, where the legitimate needs of children and young people for recreation, for leisure, for parks, for playgrounds, for play spaces seems to be getting eroded. And I think that's quite a frightening trend, if you ask me. I think one is how do you protect such spaces? I think there has to be a very active movement, or a very active community engagement around this. Communities have to, and young people, children and young people included, have to start making their voices heard. And really, and we've had those experiences also when playgrounds are threatened. There have been, the community has come together to say that no, you can't kind of deprive us of this space, etc. So I think that kind of civic action is really what is needed if we want to preserve these spaces as public spaces for our children and young people. So that is in general, and which is a larger question for everybody really in the larger community. Where when it comes to children and young people with disabilities, I think what needs to be done is that we again need a community coming together to actually pressurize. I feel the corporation is willing to listen. In all our experience, we've actually been able to get them to kind of, make such spaces inclusive. But what they do need is, you need a group which is pushing them. They are not going to do, we've tried a lot. With all our efforts, we managed to get 3 parks in Bangalore made inclusive. So that 1200 minus 3, I mean, see how many more parks are there to be done still. But I mean, it was beyond, we are a small parents group, so it was beyond us to actually do that in every park. And we tried to keep pushing the corporation to say that this should become a matter of policy. I mean, this should be how you develop a play space itself. It doesn't require somebody to tell you to do this. You've already got 3 examples. I mean, you should be doing it yourself. But it doesn't happen that way, unfortunately, like we learned. I mean, finally what really works is having a very active group which is really sitting on their case and saying, look, you have to do this in this park. You have to put these equipments. You have to make a ramp at the park. You have to do X, Y, Z. And we have a manual, actually. I mean, from our experience of about 15 years of work, we've actually developed a handbook which we will be happy to share with whoever wants. And you can actually use that as it has everything, including specifications of equipments, the kind of things that you need to do, what are the kind of accessibility features you need to introduce. Everything is there. So anybody really can just take it and just browbeat the corporation or whichever government authority is there to ensure you do it. I mean, and it can be done. I mean, where there was nothing 20 years back, there are 20 spaces. It has happened. So we're all what? I mean, we're a group of parents. It's a group of parents who's done this. So why can't anyone do it? So you're going to need this kind of community. I mean, I think we're coming back to that question that while the government holds primary responsibility, I think some kind of, role the community, whoever it is, the local community, parents groups, a school, a center, I mean, anybody, someone needs to take that step and, advocate and demand this from the government. Only then is it going to happen.
I think that's a wonderful statement. Exactly. So as I was being reminded today was also that Sachin Tendulkar also learned how to play cricket in Shivaji Park, which was a public space, right?
Absolutely.
So there is this need for more community involvement and getting in and placing your voice for the requirement of children's play area, which is, I think, as you rightly pointed out, I'm not going to summarize it, but I think you've wonderfully summarized the need for active community participation. My last point for you would be, if there are 3 takeaways that you want to share with our listeners, what would they be?
Takeaways for what? From what, Arvind? From this experience or what?
From your experience of working on a public space such as playgrounds within parks, and based on your experience of working with governments, working with communities, what would 3 main takeaways would be from your side?
Okay. So one, I think change is a slow dance. It takes a lot of time to bring in change, and we who are trying to push change will have to be very patient. And what should I say? We'll have to stay the course. I mean, it's not going to happen in a jiffy. So we'll have to be, resilient and stay the course, because it's a long haul. I think that would be the first takeaway. The second takeaway would be that the government, while we, a favorite pastime is to keep, painting the government to be this really evil thing which does nothing. But in my experience, I think government also, I mean, there are people in the government who also want to bring in change and who want to contribute in a positive way. And I think we need to leverage that. We need to find such people and leverage it to make them do what they're anyway supposed to do. It's not that they're doing us a favor, but to make them do what they should be doing. We need to push them. But there are people. So that would be my second takeaway, that there are people within the government, within the local municipal corporations, who want to work, who are interested in bringing in change which is good for the public, and we need to kind of work with them. That would be the second takeaway. And the third takeaway is that really the community can be so powerful if we, as the civic, and I'm talking about the civic community, the local communities, in whatever formation, can really drive this entire change. Whatever change you're looking for can be driven entirely by people just like you and me. I mean, just citizens. We don't have to have power. We don't have to have, whatever power. We don't need corporate power. We don't need political power. We don't need, we don't need to be in like bureaucrats. We just have to be very clear in terms of what we want to do. And we have to have that resilience to kind of, keep pushing the agenda. I think the community can be extremely powerful. Even from the example of lakes, what we've seen, what they've been able to do in so many lakes in Bangalore. I mean, it's all community initiatives. So community has much more power than probably we even recognize ourselves. And it's really getting together. I mean, if we get together, we can actually literally move mountains, clean lakes, make parks inclusive. We can do whatever it is that we want to do if we get together.
I think that's a wonderful closing statement by you. To be honest, yes, it's we that we have to bring the change, right? As Mahatma Gandhi always said, be the change that you want to see. So I would say thank you so much for joining me today and telling us so much about the power of community, not just to move mountains, but also clean parks, clean lakes, and ensure parks are maintained. So I think thank you so much for joining, and it was wonderful speaking to you, and good luck to you. And I really hope listening to this, many more people are motivated to make parks and play spaces within parks and parks in general and other commons more accessible and inclusive to all kinds of people in the population. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking on this forum. Thank you so much.
That is all for this episode, and do follow us on our next episodes on podcast Azim Premji University, and follow us on YouTube and Spotify.